Welcome to Roads to Success. This is the podcast for content and relationship marketers. Jessica Rhodes is the founder of InterviewConnections.com, the premier source for booking outstanding podcast guests. She's a wife, work-at-home mom, and rock star entrepreneur. I'm ready. I know Jessica's ready. The only question left is, are you ready to travel the road to success?
I sure hope you're ready because we have an amazing show for you today. I am your host, Jessica Rhodes, and if you like what you hear, you can catch us every week by subscribing on iTunes and Stitcher Radio. If you are an entrepreneur, wantrepreneur, or really anything with the word preneur at the end, you are in the right place because this is the podcast that will show you how to grow a business using content and relationship marketing. Today, I am joined by a successful entrepreneur. He is founder and CEO of a multi-million-dollar social media blog and hosts one of iTunes' most popular business podcasts. Once known as the King of White Papers, our guest, Michael Stelzner, is now the man holding the torch at Social Media Examiner. Generating over $1 million just in year one of Social Media Examiner, Michael is living proof that through relationship building and content marketing, you can become a leader in your industry. Michael, welcome to Roads to Success.
Jessica, it's really great to be here with you.
Thank you. So for the listeners, I met Michael at New Media Expo. So it's a testament to the power of live events. And we had the opportunity to work with him through Interview Connections booked guests on his Parenting Adventures podcast. And sad to say that has ended. But I just wanted to start, Michael, by thanking you for partnering with me and Interview Connections for your guests on that show. It was fun. And I just learned so much from working with you because we really made sure those guests were top notch. So I learned a lot from you. So thank you.
Oh, my pleasure. And you are very good at what you do. So anyone who's listening should consider what she has to offer.
Thank you. So I mentioned that this show is about content and relationship marketing because I truly believe that when you build relationships and when you are using content marketing, that really makes you very successful. And as I mentioned, you are proof of that. Michael, in your interview on the Solopreneur Hour with Michael O'Neill, you shared a story of your first time, I think it was going to Blog World, and you shared this great story about how building relationships with people in the social media marketing space. It was a great story. I actually filmed an episode of my video podcast, Interview Connections TV, that echoed some of the lessons you shared there. So I want you to start this interview out by telling the listeners why building relationships early on is so critical and how that helped you build Social Media Examiner. And if you remember the story of Blog World, if you could share what you did at that event that helped you get noticed, that would be great.
Well, relationships are important offline, right? I mean, when you're in college, having friends that are smart, that are willing to work with you to help you pass a test, or when you're in corporate America, having strong relationships with those that are around you can help you facilitate things where those that do not have strong relationships cannot. And it's no different when it comes to starting your business, your blog, your podcast, or whatever else you've got going on. And so many of us that work online just think that if we're just simply bold and we go out there and ask someone we don't know for something, that will work. But that's just exactly the opposite of reality. The fact is that people like to work with people that they know and that they like, and that they ultimately trust. And if they don't know you and how can they possibly like or trust you? So the key strategy that I've always used at Social Media Examiner is to build relationships with the right people way in advance. And when we started Social Media Examiner, I spent about a year developing relationships with people that I perceived knew a lot more than I did about social media. And then when I decided to start Social Media Examiner, I took a camera crew with me, which was pretty much just myself, a guy who had some video equipment, and an assistant. And the assistant was Amy Porterfield, who now has her own podcast and has written a book on Facebook marketing. And we identified a bunch of people that were speakers at that show that I was going to get on camera and interview, like Chris Brogan, for example. And I went to the show, walked around with a microphone in my hand that had a little flag on it. We were only 3 days old, and pretty much nobody knew who we were, and we didn't know anybody. So I started going up to people with these little flashcards in my hand that had their pictures on them, that had some pre-crafted questions and a little bio. And I said, hey, would you be willing to talk about Twitter or whatever it was that they were an expert in, that we had predetermined, on camera for 10 minutes. And nearly every one of them said yes. And I remember in one particular situation walking up to the Technorati booth, and Technorati at the time was one of these companies that rated blogs. And they had this big old, rating system for blogs. And I figured I wanted to talk to them about the power of blogs. So I went up to their booth and I said, hi, my name is Mike Stelzner. I'm with Social Media Examiner, and I would love to interview your CEO, Richard Chalijandra. And the gal that I was talking to pulled up socialmediaexaminer.com on her iPhone while I was talking to her and looked over to her right and said, Richard, Mike from Social Media Examiner is here and he'd like to interview you. And he said, okay, let's do it. And I was only 3 days old, but I had a nice looking brand and spent some time and effort to create this attractive brand. The woman that looked it up just assumed we'd been around forever and she'd never heard of us. And, that's the power of spending a little time and doing things right.
So before you went to that event, did you research who was going to be there and who you might want to interview, or did you just...
Yes. Okay. Yes. Yeah. I mean, we looked at the lineup. It was very easy to do, right? Mm-hmm. Like when you go to a conference, like our conference at Social Media Marketing World, you list all the speakers. And
right. I guess
we talked to our friends and we said, which one of these speakers do you think are the ones we ought to talk to?
So did you try, I guess my real question was, did you try to build relationships with those people through Twitter or Facebook? Did you kind of reach out to them and ask for okay, so you just...
Not at all. Okay. But what I did do is I had a couple friends that I had been building relationships with for a while that were going to be at that show. And in many cases, they introduced me. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Just like you got introduced to me from a mutual friend.
Right.
Was it Mike Brooks?
Yes, it was. Mike Brooks of Nuclear Chatter Marketing Podcast.
Exactly. So Mike Brooks, for me was Maury Smith and a couple other people. And because I had a relationship with them and because I had a target list of people that I wanted to interview, and sometimes I literally made it up on the fly because I noticed this person was attending and I didn't know they were going to be there. I would ask the friends that I had already spent and developed a relationship with if they'd be willing to introduce me. And that is very, very valuable, because if you just came up to me, Jessica, and started pitching me, it probably wouldn't have worked.
No, I agree. Mike, I've heard you mention that you are good friends with Maury Smith, and she was somebody that was able to introduce you to people. How did you first meet Maury?
Funny story. I was friends with another person named Denise Wakeman, and Denise Wakeman had me on her show, not all unlike you have me on your show. And this was many years ago, like 6 or 7 years ago, back when podcasting was in its first wave. And I noticed that Denise was really quite active on social media. So I said, Denise, who should I be meeting? And she said, you know what? I'm in a mastermind group with this gal named Mari, and she's an up and comer. And she's going to be at this event in Southern California. Why don't you come to the event and I will introduce you? So I bought a ticket to this event and I stood out in the hall and waited for her to finish speaking and waited and waited and waited. And then Denise ultimately introduced me to Mari, and that's how it started.
Wow.
So it's a very similar thing. It's all about knowing somebody, having them bridge you to someone else, and in particular, that someone else was bridged to me at a physical event.
Right. And then I'm really curious about, I'm going to keep asking questions about your relationship with Maury, because so you met her at this event, you were introduced to her, and now you're great friends with her. So what's the story in between there? How did you get from just being this person that met her after she spoke to being somebody that, is on her level and you're friends with her?
Yeah. So I had a flip cam, and eventually I said, hey, would you be willing, since we both live in the same city, to have lunch? And after lunch, I did a little video interview of her, and I promoted that to my audience in the white paper space, and she appreciated that. And then I just started building a relationship with her in the same way that I build a relationship with a lot of people that I want to develop a relationship with, which is I provided value where I could for her. Does that make sense?
Yes.
She was up and coming. I was already successful, not in social media, but in a different space. And I was providing mentorship to her, if you will, on how she might be able to do things better where she desired to do things. And she was jointly providing mentorship back to me regarding how I could do things better in the space that I'm in. We all have something of value to other people.
Right.
And if we can figure out what they need and how we might be able to help, that can be very powerful.
That's awesome. And Mike, one of the questions that I had written down, but you're really answering it. So I'm going to say the question and kind of reemphasize your answer is, a lot of my clients and the people I work with at Interview Connections, a lot of them want to be interviewing people like you and Mari on their podcast. And they're always wondering, well, how can I connect with them? And I mean, exactly what you just said, Mike, just going to them and asking for something, asking for an interview really doesn't work. You need to start by providing value. And so you kind of already answered that question, but I love that you said that because you're right. I mean, Mike, I did not ask you to be a guest on my podcast until I knew that, of course I didn't have a podcast back when we first met, but that's not the point. The point is that, I wasn't going to just ask for something in return before knowing that you knew, liked, and trusted me. So
let me dig a little deeper here too, because, my other podcast that's no longer operational, which is Parenting Adventures, excuse me, you helped find nearly all the guests for that show, with the exception of the few that I had already kind of had in my bucket list. And you did the initial brokering and selling of me. And that, in some regards, actually is much better than me brokering and selling myself, because you kind of pumped me up and persuaded these people that I'm someone worth interviewing. So you acted as an agent for me in a way that a friend would act as an agent for me. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely.
And when I got on the interview with some of these people, after the interview, they would ask me, well, what do you do? And I would explain what I did with the Social Media Examiner. And then all of a sudden they got really interested. And I would say, well, I can give you some advice and I can help you out. And I became close to quite a few of these people that I interviewed that you brought to me, because I didn't just give them the gift of revealing their story to my audience. I went further after the interview and offered to help them in ways that I thought I could provide extra value to them without asking for anything in return. And had I continued that podcast, I know that would have come back in spades.
Right. I know that I think it was Holly Homer that actually, she was on Parenting Adventures, and then you had her come on Social Media Marketing because she has an amazing Facebook presence. So we didn't even think that kind of relationship would build, but we found some people that were amazing for social media. So that was really, really neat. So I'd like to switch gears a little bit and go into content marketing. We've covered so much amazing content about relationship building, and there's so much more I could ask you, but I have some questions about content marketing. So I know that at Social Media Examiner, you have a huge team of editors. I think you said something like 7 editors for each blog post that goes up.
Correct.
Is that right?
Yes.
So it's amazing. And you have so many writers producing content. Now, a lot of new entrepreneurs or people, maybe solo entrepreneurs with a small team, they only want to be kind of making use of one platform. They just want to be blogging, or they only want to have a podcast, or they only want to do videos. I would like your take, Michael, on why it's important, assuming you agree with me, that you leverage multiple platforms, because you have a podcast, you obviously have your blog. So what are your thoughts on,
So, I can relate, having been an entrepreneur in the past, a solopreneur, if you will, one-man show in the past. First and foremost, we've got to be realistic about what time we have as business owners, right? So if you're the one that's going to do all the content, producing a podcast, especially nowadays, where people are trying to do more than one a week, can be quite a all-consuming job. Writing blog posts multiple times a week can also be an all-consuming job. So in the beginning, I'm not opposed to choosing one path, like podcast versus video versus written. But in the long run, there are different kinds of people that are interested in consuming different kinds of content. And my show is 45 minutes long. Your show is 30 minutes long. Nobody's spending 30 minutes or 45 minutes reading blog posts. They're just not.
Right.
They're spending up 1 minute to 3 minutes. So, and people that are doing that are skimming. They're not even reading everything. Alternatively, someone like myself who doesn't read blog posts hardly ever, but instead listens to podcasts, would never find you if you only published a blog, because I don't like to consume content that way.
Right.
So in the case of Social Media Examiner, we publish the 45-minute show, which people listen to even more religiously than they read our blog content, because we know that some people want to consume audio while they're driving, and other people want to read content when they're at their desk. So as your business gets momentum, and as you begin to get traction and begin to see a return for the work that you're doing, it is worthy to consider experimenting with more than one form of content marketing.
I totally agree. I mean, when I started, I was just blogging, and then I started doing the videos, and now I'm starting the podcast. It's definitely a lot of work for sure. And people that do more than one podcast a week, I think, are crazy, but all more power to you if you can get that much content out there. But Michael, I have a question about branding, because you obviously, your brand, Social Media Examiner, is not your personal brand. Do you think that using your personal brand hurts or helps people when trying to get noticed?
Yes and yes. It can help you or it could hurt you. When I was the white paper guy, it was my personal brand. It was Michael Stelzner's Writing White Papers, and I wrote a book called Writing White Papers, and I was the name in the book. And I was the guy that, basically companies wanted to hire. And that's perfect when you're small, but you can eventually get to the point where you can only scale yourself so much.
Right.
And you're going to hit a glass ceiling that is impenetrable. And at that point, that's when you kind of wish your brand wasn't just yourself anymore.
Right.
Because I did get to the point where my white paper business, I had people lining up for months wanting to wait for me, not wanting to work for any of my other writers because they wanted my name because I'm the brand. So, and the other negative side to that, and you eventually, most people start out with their self as the brand and then realize as they grow that they can't grow any further. The other flip side of it is that not everybody might like you, the person.
Right.
There are plenty of personalities out there in our space that are not necessarily likable.
Right.
So that's the downside to you as the brand, because if they don't like your sense of humor, they don't like the way you look, they don't like the way you talk, then all of a sudden that's all affiliated with your brand, and that could be negative. Now, on the flip side of it, when I started Social Media Examiner, I had already had that fame of myself as the brand, and I just did not like it. So I decided to be kind of the man behind the curtain, like the Wizard of Oz, when I started Social Media Examiner, not reveal who the person was behind the brand, but instead create a brand that people could rally around. Because if it was Michael Stelzner's Social Media Examiner, then everybody wouldn't want to be part of this quote unquote movement because it's just self-serving for Michael Stelzner.
Right.
But if I wasn't part of it and it was all about Social Media Examiner and they all felt like it was part of a common good movement, then they would rally behind it. And that's exactly what happened. So I made it much more about putting the spotlight on other people and a lot less about putting the spotlight on me. And it really wasn't until my book came out about 2 years into it, and then really when my podcast came out 3 years into it, that I actually came out from behind the curtain and allowed myself to be affiliated with the brand. I just know we wouldn't be as big as we are today with 1 million people reading our blog if it was me.
That's really true. And because I go back and forth about, do I make it more, interview connections? I'm trying to build its own brand, but then it seems
you're
like
the spokesperson for the brand, right? You're not the brand. That's the point, right?
Right. Yeah, because at the end of the day, I mean, if you want your business to be, not everyone, I know that I listened to an interview earlier with you, Michael, on, I think it was Charlene Johnson, if I'm remembering her name correctly.
Charlene Johnson, yeah.
Yeah, so I know that you were talking with her about the personal branding versus a non-personal brand. And, at the end of the day, I know that you said you didn't, you don't plan on selling the business, but if you did, not many people probably would be as likely to buy Michael Stelzner Incorporated. Social Media Examiner is something that anyone could kind of get behind. So I guess if you're thinking long term, it's a little bit better to have a non-personal brand. So
Correct.
Definitely interesting, especially for early entrepreneurs just starting out, just trying to decide where to put your stake. Is it behind a business name or a personal brand? So I appreciate your thoughts on the matter.
Yeah, like take a look at Gary Vaynerchuk. He is someone who is a personal brand that's taken his brand really, really far. So you can still do that. But I think that ultimately you're going to get to the point where everybody wants a piece of you and then you can't really grow your business. Right. And that's the challenge.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So Michael, I have one more question that came in from somebody on Facebook. I'm a part of a women's podcasters Facebook group called She Podcasts, and I posted to see if anyone had any additional questions for you. So one question that a woman in the group had was just your thoughts on how frequently you post on Facebook and Twitter. I mean, especially I guess from the perspective of maybe a solo entrepreneur or a smaller business and maybe a blog, like Social Media Examiner that's putting out several posts a week. Do you have any thoughts on some, I guess, social media etiquette, how much to post?
It's a wonderful question. I will first tell you what we do at Social Media Examiner,
Okay.
which is we post probably 5 to 7 times a day on our Facebook page and probably 20 to 30 times on Twitter. So it's because we are a publisher, right? And we're publishing 10 articles a week. And on top of that, we're also kind of aggregating news in the industry and because an interesting article. So that's what our audience wants. So, but I think that the question will be, if for you, is what are you trying to accomplish? There is, if you're using your personal Facebook profile, you probably want to be in front of people a lot. So you probably should post with some level of frequency, something about you. For example, on my Facebook page, I post not just, I rarely ever on my personal profile post anything related to Social Media Examiner unless it's a podcast interview every once in a while or a sale that we might be having that's ending, but for the most part, that's the exception rather than the rule. On my personal profile, I'm just posting things about my life because I know that being in front of my friends is important for me. You know what I mean? Because I want them to not forget about me,
Right.
and I want them to be thinking about Social Media Examiner and me whenever they have some social media related thing going on. So there is no golden rule. There is no right or wrong answer. It's about what your audience finds interesting and what you find acceptable. What I don't like doing, and I'm sure you've seen this, I hate it when somebody posts like 50 times a day, but there are people that do that, right?
Right.
They're just like a shotgun. That's too much. I would say that the happy middle ground would be like two to 3 times a day, very interesting stuff that people would find of value, non-promotional, and perhaps more if it works. And then you just experiment and you keep seeing whether if you increase the frequency, any negative consequences happen.
Michael, were you using Facebook before you started Social Media Examiner? Like, were you ever on Facebook? Okay.
No, I didn't even start my Facebook account until a good 5 months after launching Social Media Examiner.
So it really was.
I had a personal account, but we didn't have a page, you know what I mean, for the business. But I did have a Twitter account. That was the only thing I had. I had Twitter for about 9 months before I started Social Media Examiner.
Because I guess I was curious if there was ever a time that you were on social media just as Michael Stelzner for personal friends and family, not all the friends we have in business. So
generally, no. I only went there because it's a place I needed to be. But now I'm there. Now I'm there because I really enjoy it.
Yeah.
For me, it was a privacy issue. I did not want to be. I didn't understand how it all worked. I wasn't comfortable with it.
Right.
But now that I know that I can, for example, like I post things to my friends, which I believe you and I are friends on Facebook, that no one else sees. Like my friends will see the pictures of my children, but the followers will not. And that's a nice little security thing for me because I don't want.
And how selective are you with people that friend you? I mean, we're friends, but of course we work together and we met
I only
each other,
I only accept friend requests on Facebook from people that actually I know.
Okay.
So it just defaults to follower. You understand what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So, and I don't ever post the personal stuff outside of Facebook friends ever
Right.
to anyone. Like most people that are not friends with me on Facebook, they're going to see funny videos. They're going to see interesting observations. They're going to see stuff related to my business, but they're not going to see the stuff like of my kids holding up signs
Right.
or, funny things that my kids do that you likely have seen.
I almost wish that I didn't. I mean, I'm a little bit younger than you, as some people might know. I'm 26, and I know that you're not 26. So
I got 20 years on you.
So I was using Facebook through college. So for a long time before I started my business, it was totally personal. So there was definitely quite a transition period into totally adjusting the types of things I was posting. I mean, I used to be, work in a political nonprofit. So my postings totally changed and who my audience was totally changed. So now I post, business stuff on my personal timeline and who I see in my newsfeed totally changes. So I think that's a transition that a lot of people probably more in my generation experience when they start their businesses. Facebook becomes you're there for a very different reason. I'm rarely there to interact with personal friends. It's really business friends. So,
well, and this is where lists come in handy too, right? I mean, I forget what they call them these days on Facebook, but you can create different groups, if you will, in your personal profile, like political stuff for your political friends or actually, close, intimate family. And when you select that option, those lists from the drop down group, only those people will see that. So that does allow you to essentially make sure that amongst your friends, you can even have some subgroups like college. I think I have a couple. One's called college, one's called church, one's called friends, you know what I mean? Which is the standard group. And I can publish church stuff to just my church group and not necessarily offend those of my followers and friends who are not necessarily in church. And that's kind of cool. And most people don't even think about that.
Yeah, that I should probably investigate that. I know I have a close friends list, but other than that, I don't even know when I updated that. So
you can create as many of them as you want.
Yeah, awesome. So Michael, we've reached the end of the interview. So I want to thank you so much for joining us today. How can listeners connect with you and learn more about you and Social Media Examiner?
Well, I have a podcast called Social Media Marketing. And if you listen to Jessica's and you want to add another one to your list, just find Social Media Marketing. And then if you want to, and it's all free, socialmediaexaminer.com is free. And you'll find articles that we publish every day there. And you can just go ahead and, read it, consume it, and hopefully figure out how to apply it to your business.
Fantastic. If you enjoyed this episode, visit RTS Podcast, as in Roads to Success Podcast.com, and subscribe to the show in iTunes or Stitcher Radio. Roads to Success is a production of Interview Connections, where we book great podcast guests. Visit interviewconnections.com to learn more about how we can help you start or grow your podcast.